Does it still feel surreal thinking that it all started with you writing this game all those years ago, and now it's being reinterpreted in a different medium, and you see all these people reacting to it in a certain way, and you're sitting there, let's say it was even that South by Southwest panel you were on, and you're sitting there seeing the reaction to the show that was based on the game that you guys made so long ago. I mean, how does that feel?
The South by Southwest panel was, it's all surreal. It's all very surreal. Yeah. The moment that sticks out to me is our moderator asked about the Seraphites, and a few people in the audience whistled, like they knew. That's right. Like not only like are they fans, they're like intense fans, and they pay attention to the tiniest details. Yeah. And that's also why we have to do such an authentic job when we translate it, because we know if we screw up those details, they're going to be the first ones to pick up on it. Right. But I love that they give it that kind of scrutiny.
So that puts a lot of pressure, and I want to talk a little bit about the challenges. And so I've got some thoughts in just terms of challenges of adapting from video game IP with such a huge fan base. What were the main challenges, creative challenges that you faced, specifically even with season 2?
You know, there's different kind of engines between these mediums. And games, there's obviously the thrill, the fun, the adrenaline of the action sequences, because you're in them, you're playing them. On a TV show, really your engine is drama. Now, these things cross-pollinate, and the show has action and the game has drama, and those are driving it forward. But you could go a long time without the drama and just be carried by the gameplay on the game side. So in the show, it's like we have to really think about these action sequences of like each one, how is it very character-driven? Yeah. Now, in the game, we can think of a long gameplay sequence that could last hours, and that also has to be character-driven. Again, it could last for hours. Here, you might have a 10-minute action sequence, and it has to move the drama forward. So that requires certain changes. And then there's just the stuff I enjoy the most, which is, well, now that we're not tied to a particular point of view like we're in the game. In the game, it's like we're dogmatic of like, okay, when you're playing Ellie, you're only seeing what Ellie is seeing and hearing and feeling and experiencing. When you're playing as Abby, that's all there is. Yeah. In the show, we can leave those characters and go somewhere else. And that allows us to expand. Yeah. So to take a character like Eugene, or to take a character like Kat, Ellie's girlfriend, that we only heard about in the game, and really explore who those people are and what that means.
You know, it's interesting because I'm asked a lot about the challenges for adaptation, and I always say from a broad level, it's striking the balance between staying true to what the game is, but then leveraging the new medium, and you mentioned it really well, is trying to fill those gaps that you can't translate into the medium. So you mentioned things like exploration, combat, all these things that you now take out of the game. There's a void you have to fill. And I think that striking the right balance is what can you add to it that you couldn't do in the game. And you mentioned new characters, backstory. So that's the challenge, is trying to find the balance between keeping what's core and then what to add that's new. And I think what's great is what you and Craig have done so well is, and it's because you know the game, because you made it so well, you know what those creative trade-offs are, what you should add that's new, what you should take out. And I think that's the hardest piece that I think you've done well.
Yeah, what's nice with the collaboration with Craig, that was evident from the first meeting I had with him, is like how much he loves these games, these characters, these relationships. So often our first conversations about the adaptation is, what was his experience playing through it? What resonated with him? What was he curious to find out about more? And then sometimes I'll even talk about it like, well, here are things we left on the cutting room floor. Here are things that we started exploring, but just realized for a bunch of different reasons we couldn't fit into the game. But we have ideas about who these characters are, or backstory stuff. And that becomes ripe for like these conversations of like, okay, where can we expand? Oh, that this character we just heard about, who is he? What would his relationship be with Joel and Ellie? And how can we use that, again, to propel the story forward so that people that have... You don't need to play the game to enjoy the show. Yeah. That was always important. But if you do, and you watch a show, it will fill in certain gaps for the game. So if you go back and play the game, it will make that experience richer. Likewise, there's certain things that don't make it into the show that are in the game. If you play the game and then watch the show, it makes that experience richer. And that's constantly in our mind of like, okay, how do these things really complement and talk to each other?
So it makes me think a lot about what the show has sort of done for video game adaptations, and I'm asked this a lot. Just on the PlayStation production side, I feel that this show is it's sort of a defining moment, because I think it validates the work we're all doing to adapt our great library into film and TV. And I think there's a couple of things it's showing. First of all, it shows that the importance of you can stay authentic while also expanding and heightening and finding new ways to expand the world and expand the story. And I think you've done that. And it starts with finding the great creators, the right creators. But then also it shows that you can not only cater to the core fans who love the franchise, but also you can still reach out to new audiences without sort of running over each other.
Yeah, that was really great about what you guys are doing in PlayStation Productions and this collaboration between Sony, Naughty Dog, HBO, PlayStation. There was this understanding of, the game has become something really special, and we have to honor it. And, we don't have to do this show.
Right.
But we should do it if there's a great opportunity to do it really well, to do an excellent version of it. Because now we are exposing, selfishly, I love the story so much, I love these characters so much, I get to expose it to now a larger audience. Right. And in a way, I've now had so many people come up to me and said, because of this show, I went and bought a PlayStation and played the game. And, my first love is video games. And I love the fact that this has become a weird ambassador for video games and is bringing people over and exposing them to how rich of a storytelling medium video games have become.
Right. I think what this is also going to do is, I think now you're going to see a lot more adaptations, and certainly from us for sure, but I think a lot of creators are seeing the opportunity of creating another touch point of their franchise to reach and engage fans and also new people. And how do they grow the franchise to reach new audiences? So you talked about, and really I'm leaning into this is because I've got a little treasure here. We talk about franchise extensions.
Look at this.
Right? Look at this. It's just, but this is a great example of how do you create new touch points, interesting touch points for fans, and sort of franchise extensions. And I see things like this incredible controller. I see things like we demoed this great prototype at CES of The Last of Us immersive experience. So I think things like that are great extensions. It's a way for fans to engage in and connect with their favorite games in just different places. So they play the game, they put it down, they go and watch the show, they can step into the world in this great LBE space. So I think this is just a great fan service. But to your point, it has to be meaningful, thoughtful, authentic.
It has to be excellent.
Yeah, high quality.
All of this, you're right, all of it comes from, when we were growing up, and there's certain things that have just, we're nerds, and either we're staying at home and playing video games or watching movies, but it's I remember watching Ghostbusters and just how enamored I was with that movie, and I had to have the t-shirt and the lunchbox, and it made me connected to it. It kind of formed my identity a little bit. And that's why, to me, these things feel really important. And it's you could just easily let's just cash in, let's just do a bunch of really cheap stuff. And it's no, let's pay attention, let's be thoughtful. Yeah. When we did the Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights experience, that was a chance for whether people are fans of the show or fans of the game to walk through and be inside and almost get that feeling like I had when I walked on set.
Right.
And you get to now use your other senses. You get to smell clickers, feel the heat of a Molotov cocktail. And those experiences are very special.
That's right.
On the one hand, it's entertainment. And on the other hand, you constantly have fans come up to us and say what these things mean to them, how it helped them through a tough period of their life. So yes, on one hand, it could be frivolous. On the other hand, it could be really weighty and meaningful. And that's why we take it as seriously as we do.
So talking about that passion for the fans, what do you think that resonates? Why has The Last of Us, in your opinion, sort of created this cultural moment and sort of resonates culturally and broader in so many ways? What do you think the elements are?
I don't entirely know. Sometimes it's just right place at the right time. And I don't mean to be dismissive or have some fake modesty. It's some of it is luck.
Yeah.
And some of it is, when I was writing that story, when I first kind of dreamed about it, even back in my school days when the early ideas for this came around, it was really trying to channel a lot of my parents and the sacrifices they've made for me and my brother. And that's so universal, this kind of unconditional love a parent feels for their child. And, as a kid, you don't quite understand it, I think, fully until you have your own kids. We talk a lot about that. And I really just try to tap into that with the story. And, even though it's like a genre story, it could be very pulpy. It's a zombie story, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're in the zombie genre. But it is, right? It was inspired.
100%.
It was initially inspired by Night of the Living Dead.
100%.
But Night of the Living Dead was actually, if you go back to that, it's like, okay, that's like one of the first kind of, zombie story that kind of broke the boundaries of popular culture. But it was really a story about societal problems. And ultimately, it's a story about racism, like where that story ends. So that genre, to me, always is making some kind of social commentary. There's something about that unconditional love between a parent and a child that is very universal. And I think being like in the genre that is very popular, telling this kind of heartfelt story between these characters, this father and daughter relationship, and everything else around it, but that's really the core of it. It's a story about love. That kind of broad appeal of love really connected with a lot of people.
Right.
So it's just this like weird kind of chemistry set that it's hard to like reverse engineer it. And that's why, with Last of Us Part 2, it was important for me to not repeat ourselves. Okay, how do you take this story further? What's something else you could do that complements that story without trying to repeat it? Because I felt like in repeated it, we would dilute it. And it's the same thing we're doing with the show.
Yeah.
All right, season 1 had this. Again, it's kind of wild for me to even say this, but it's like it was HBO's most successful first season ever.
That's incredible, yeah.
From Game of Thrones to Sopranos to like all these incredible shows, somehow this became more successful than that. And yet with that, it was important not to repeat ourselves. That, this is based on a second game and we're going to go somewhere different. We're not telling the same exact story. And I can't wait to see how people react to it.
No, it's because I think a lot about the how broad it's become, how more of a cultural moment. I think about similar to what you said. I think that what really made this stand out, and this is just me looking from my perspective, just when the game first came out, is I think it had a weight and a depth to the story that I don't think we've ever experienced before. And I think you did some things which is it sort of went against convention. You took some like story risks and like there was emotional nuance. You didn't shy away from very difficult themes as well. So I think all of that added a weight and a depth to the story that I don't think we've experienced. And look, and it does, look, technically it's great and gameplay and the world is fantastic, but at the heart it's about love, it's about loss, it's about survival, it's these human like themes that everyone really appreciates. So that's what really stuck. And then also the world. I mean, the world you all built is harsh, it's brutal, but it's the pockets of hope and love and connection and humanity. That sort of that duality of the world was something that really stood out. So that just made it race.
And there's one thing that we shouldn't underplay because it's maybe the most important component of what made it successful. It was made at Naughty Dog.
Yeah.
You could take this idea to a lot of other places and it would not succeed. I think it was that combination of this idea executed really beautifully by so many talented engineers and artists and production people at Naughty Dog. And then, promoted as it was by PlayStation. It's like you have to have these three things. You have to have like the creative idea, the execution, and the business side of it for something like this to succeed. And you lose any one of those components and it could quickly fall apart. I'm actually curious for you, because on the making of it side, I was very insecure about whether this thing will be successful or not, all the way until it was. What did you guys think about it? Like, as we're making it, as it's about to be released, did you have any inkling of what you had on your hands?
100% no, not at all. So what's interesting, so a couple of things. So I put a lot of faith in the creative team. Now that is when you've got a great creative team, you sort of trust their vision. But I think what really stood out for me was it was a left turn from what you as a studio have done before. In terms of if you look back at Uncharted, even the stuff you did before that, this was very different. It was like a full mature game. But also what was interesting is it was in a genre that was quite broad and there was a lot of excitement and people really enjoyed that genre. And so the thought I always thought about is the thought of a Naughty Dog team going into that genre, into that, again, that zombie action genre, and making something with depth and more story than you've ever seen, that was really exciting. So I had confidence all the way through, just because of the team, but also the space in which you were going. And then I remember when you guys pitched that story the first time, and there wasn't a dry eye in that room when you went through it. It was something that we hadn't experienced before, and so that's when I really felt it was something very, very special. And it was, the thing that I remembered coming out of it is not the tech and the visuals and the gameplay, it was the story and it was the characters. And that's when you know, okay, you got something really, really special there. So that's why I'd have the confidence right from the very start. And same with the show. I mean, perfect adaptation, knowing quality creators, you know you've got great creators on it and you trust them. And so that's why I've been confident the whole way through.
No, I'm glad someone was.
So just to talk a little bit about what, talking about you as a studio and like what you've created in The Last of Us, what are some of the learnings that you've now taken from making these two games and even from the show that you're now going to take to your next project? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Oh, everything we do, we learn from and apply to the next project. So it's like, without Crash Bandicoot, there's no Jak and Daxter. Without Jak and Daxter, there's no Uncharted. Yeah. Without Uncharted, there's no Last of Us. And every single one of those, we've learned how to make tighter gameplay, better animation, build a technology that allows us to express ourselves as game designers in that space. And again, there's just infinite amount of learnings and small details that we can get into. But just on a high level, we've really learned how to marry story and gameplay and how have them inform each other and kind of work with each other. And, for example, one of the things we learned in Last of Us 1 is that as soon as you play a different character, you play the game differently, just based on how they look. So when people went from playing Joel to playing Ellie, they started playing the game differently. They were more careful. And there is some gameplay differences, but not massive ones. And then with Last of Us 2, we're like, okay, how do we take that further? Can we get you to play a character that has different moral values than you? And the game is forcing you to really challenge yourself as you go forward and do things you would be uncomfortable with. And that's even something that we got at the end of the first game when Joel has to make that choice and kill the people in the hospital. There's people that really resisted. They put the controller down. They didn't want to do it. And then we're like, that's such an interesting dilemma that's happening inside their head.
I was one of those.
Kind of like the dilemma that's happening inside the character's head.
Yeah.
So we're often thinking about mechanics and story. And then, so now we have Last of Us 2 under our belt, obviously all the Uncharted's and just really a lot of writing techniques I've learned on the show, theme park techniques we learned on the Universal stuff that we worked on and some other stuff, that we're taking all those learnings and now applying them to our next game, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, and to say, okay, now that we kind of unshackled ourselves from the constraints of grounded reality, even more so, how do we use that freedom to tell a story, like a really personal, deep story, again, in a genre? So we're going to come in hide under the pulpy action adventure of this sci-fi adventure of this intergalactic bounty hunter and tell a really compelling story that has a deep philosophical question within it.
But it's very clear you could see the evolution and the learnings from each one. And talking about when I think about learnings from even the show and how what I've taken from that for future adaptations that we got for PlayStation Productions, there's a couple of things that really come to mind. Number one is it starts with the creators. Get the best creators that you fully trust who know how to make those creative trade-offs to what to keep and what to let go of or what to bring in new. I think the second thing, interestingly enough, is not to try and create a one-for-one copy of the game. And I think people look at the show and they probably interpret that it's exactly like the game, but that's where you've done a good job because you've expanded it, you've added a lot of new.
That's the best. Craig and I talk about that all the time. They'll say, that was exactly like the game, this whole scene. And we're like, it wasn't. It was shot differently. There's different lines. The pacing is different, but it felt like it. And that was what's important for us, is to capture the soul, the spirit of it, not the really superficial details. Even though sometimes we sweat and perfect the superficial details as well, but that's less important to us than what is the scene about? What is this story ultimately about? That has to remain the same.
Yeah, and that's the big takeaway, is that faithful adaptation doesn't mean copy it like for like. It's about finding what's core to it and then be the one to expand it and heighten it and find new ways, bring in new perspectives, character arcs, things you couldn't explore in the game, which I think is quite exciting. I think we're doing that with Until Dawn. We're creating a whole story within the universe. We're doing that with Twisted Metal, focusing on these characters and just creating an original story with these characters. And so the other piece is also, we can't stop without talking about the great casting. I think authentic casting is important, where I think Bella and Pedro did not just mimic the characters of the game. They brought something new and fresh to it. I think that's important. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
And when you bring in such talented actors, really talented artists, because there's like, it's almost like, yes, there's a casting of our actors, but there's also the casting of who's doing our prosthetics, who's doing our VFX. And we brought the best of the best.
Wow.
And when you bring the best of the best, you don't bring them as just someone you're just going to dictate and tell them what to do or try to just copy something. As artists, they have to express themselves as well. And that's how they do their best work. And you say, okay, do it as much of a deep dive as you're comfortable with. Often we tell all the actors, don't play the game, because we didn't want them to copy already brilliant performances by Troy Baker or Ashley Johnson or the rest of the cast. We wanted them to make it your own.
Yeah.
We already have that version. Now let's get this version. They wouldn't listen to us. They either play the game or they watch videos. But they did do an incredible job of making it their own. And, I would have these conversations with Pedro about just his thought process and how he's thinking about Joel's backstory and how that backstory dictates any particular moment. And you could just see him really lose himself and be... I mean, acting is really hard. It's like they're so vulnerable in front of a giant crew. I'm sometimes like in awe of how much they're putting themselves out there. And that only comes through, obviously, a great amount of talent, but creating a safe space for them to do it.
Wow.
Allowing them to experiment, to say, you not have to copy this. Like, it's okay to deviate if you're making it special. And that's the thing, for example, like even Craig is adapting and changing things. Right. And the thing I always tell Craig is like, this isn't just my programmer mind, the way I think about things. It's almost like I have an algorithm. If we deviate from the game, depending on how much we deviate, the greater the deviation, the more special the thing has to be. So for example, that Bill and Frank episode deviates wildly from the game. But that episode was so special, was so beautifully written, and speaks to the theme of The Last of Us in such an important way, it was worth that detour.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at all of it across the board. At the same time, you have all these production designers and costume designers and people that are poring over the game and studying it in incredible detail. And, we had to build it digitally. Now they have to build physically. And building something physically has just different limitations. And they did such an incredible job. Again, it's not always exactly one-to-one, but it gives you the feeling you had when you played the game, when you first saw those costumes, or you first walked into a particular environment. Like, we got to stand inside of Jackson. Yeah. And how incredible was
Remarkable. That? Absolutely. I think about, all those years ago when we had those early discussions about the show, and we spoke so, and this is before any of it was created. It's quite remarkable to think all that time's now passed. Now we're here in the second season, and having walked onto these sets, seen these worlds come to life, seen all these hundreds of people working so hard to put it together, it's just remarkable how far it's come based on those early conversations.
No, and I remember when I first walked into Joel's house for season 2, and I'm there with Hallie Gross, my co-writer on the game and the show, and I'm just like, look at this dining room. It's exactly like it was in the game. Look at this couch. Look at his guitar. Look at his workbench. And here's an area we didn't even have in the game. And look at how well defined it is. It all feels consistent. It feels like Joel has lived here. It's such a special feeling. And I hope that feeling translates to people when they watch the show.
PlayStation